When people who ain't from around the way meet a hood nigga like me, they always think the same shit. Of course he ended up a thug. Look where he grew up. Look at his family. But I did have a choice. And this is what I chose.
Now, Kanan is going to be a change man for the rest of Season 4, Season 5 and beyond. Hopefully we get to see his character continue into Power Origins, because he was a big influence on both Tommy and Ghost. We learned back in Power, in terms of how Kanan helped them turn from boys into men. Kanan also taught them the chop shop. Tommy said there wasn't an idea that Ghost didn't take from him, which was in regards to the washing falls. It was said Kanan did have a car wash business to clean his cash. So, there is a lot more we need to learn from Kanan, and long may it continue. But by that point when Kanan gets to where he's mentoring Ghost and Tommy, working for Breeze, where would the Thomases be? Where will his relationship be with the Thomases? Where will his relationship be with Crystal? Especially because we know Sean's mother was Jorita. And that's the hot topic of this particular breakdown. The next big death that Kanan may feel in the second half of Season 4, which I think will be Crystal after Joyce Thomas. Taking Crystal away will push him even further into the hands of the likes of Snaps, Pop, and eventually Breeze and maybe a few others. I think a lot depends on who killed Famous and what follows after. What does Kanan do? How does he react? So, in the rest of this breakdown, we're going to be diving deep into all things Kanan, but more so what's the next move the writers can hurt him with in all things Raising Kanan Season 4. Now, so far across the entire show, who was Kanan lost or who was Kanan connected to where they were murdered? In Season 1, Kanan pulled the trigger on Buck 20, although that death was claimed by D-Wiz, but as a result, he then lost D-Wiz. Another murder that was connected to him in Season 1 was Nicole, Jukebox's girlfriend. She died from the bad batch he cooked up, along with more than a dozen in the streets. In Season 3, even though he wasn't exactly involved in Detective Burke's murder, he kind of was. She was getting way too close to the truth in terms of the connection between Howard, Kanan, and Rock, and in fact, she did figure out the truth almost to the T. So, in 301, he told Howard that she needs to be taken care of. She knows the score. Towards the end of Season 3, he then pulled the trigger on his business partner, Ronnie Mathis, and then he lost Detective Howard. In the grand scheme of things, even though Kanan has been through a lot in terms of his relationship with Rock, being manipulated, and so much more, he hadn't lost too many people before Season 4. He hasn't felt that pain that Jukebox has felt. The only one you could say he really lost was D-Wiz, and I guess Detective Howard, but again, there wasn't much of a relationship here anyway. But this is why I always maintained, Kanan needs to feel more death. And the clue was in Sasha Penn's quotes which he gave back in March. What we start to see across Season 4 is a violence, loss, and chaos start to feel comfortable for Kanan, and so he's a lot less strategic and more vengeful. He's angry, and he feels betrayed by everyone. He doesn't know who he can and can't trust, and yet at the same time, he wants to be who he was before. And so it's like, how do I get to that? So the clue was always in Sasha Penn's quotes from early on. Kanan was going to feel a lot more loss in Season 4. There'd be more chaos around him, which makes him less strategic, but more so looking for revenge. In terms of being less strategic, we have kind of started to see that play out already, because this is where Snaps and Pop have come in. This is why they've been mentoring him and nurturing him. They're seeing the mistakes that he's making at a young age, and they're thinking, if they can fix these mistakes early doors, then this kid can make us a lot of money in the long term. But in terms of his revenge, him being more vengeful, we're definitely going to see that in 406 onwards. And what's triggered this Kanan that we're about to see in the second half of Season 4 is of course, Famous's death. Although in my opinion, it's only the beginning. Him feeling this pain was definitely needed. The next step for his story arc is something that Jukebox felt way back in Season 1. But it definitely is only the start of more loss, more pain, more hurt, which in turn will only lead to more anger, more violence, more chaos, and definitely more revenge. So what could potentially trigger Kanan going one step further? I think taking Crystal away next is probably the most likely outcome in Season 4. Taking Crystal away means he loses his Rock, who at times has been keeping his head on his shoulders. He hasn't always listened to the advice Crystal has been giving him in 401 and 402, but he did take the advice in terms of getting out of the old apartment and going into a new one. She's been giving him very good business advice, which was very similar to Snaps and Pop, and she's also trying to make an effort with Duke. She knows Duke means a lot to Kanan, and because she means a lot to Kanan, she apologized for what went down in Season 3, and she really is trying to make an effort. There's more and more that Kanan unfolds and discovers that pushes him further away from his mother, but at the same time, he still wants that love, and he's finding that love in other places with Snaps, Pop, Crystal, and also Duke. So, I have been saying it through the entirety of Season 4, it seems like they're giving way too much screen time to Crystal, in terms of how important she's becoming to Kanan. And I do think that only means one thing, especially with the way they're taking Kanan's story arc in Season 4. It does feel like Season 4 is going to be a big shift for Kanan Stark, where he feels a lot more pain, where he loses loved ones, and I do think Crystal is going to be the big next death that he needs to feel and probably will in the second half of Season 4. Circling back around to the beginning, you have to think, what pushes Kanan down an even darker path? What pushes him further into the hands of the likes of Snaps, Pop, eventually Breeze, and then working with the young Ghost and Tommy? It's where he loses everybody around him, including Famous, Crystal, and the Thomases, drifting further away from Duke, and that brings me over to the Thomases, and specifically Rock. I do think her interaction with Rock is definitely one to watch. Rock's past actions in terms of how she's been willing to eliminate threats to hold and keep that authority or Kanan's loyalty definitely can't be overlooked. She even killed Howard in front of Kanan to protect her empire and also protect Marvin, and she justified it as protecting the family. She also killed D-Wiz to protect Kanan, although I think it was a choice of either D-Wiz or Kanan, because as Unique said in episode 102, the streets needed a body. And the same goes for the situation before. I do think it was going to be a situation where either it was Detective Howard or Marvin, and she was never going to throw Marvin under the bus. But lying to him about who Detective Howard was, lying to him about DEF CON, keeping him close and taking him to the Catskill Mountains in 205, she was trying to keep that control over Kanan after seeing him go over to Howard's. However, a lot of Rock's moves, lies and manipulation has definitely pushed Kanan further away. But this precedent does kind of suggest Rock could potentially see Crystal as someone who's between her and Kanan, someone who's in the way just like Howard was. If she feels as if Crystal's presence is becoming way too much, or she's becoming an increasing influence or a distraction in Kanan's life, pulling him in a direction that Rock can't control, what do you guys think Rock will think? Again, looking at this situation with Davina, she knew Kanan was head over heels for this girl. She even mentioned he was all droopy-eyed at home, but she knew damn well Kanan couldn't be distracted in the world that they're in. She said something very similar to Symphony.
I forgot who I was. But seeing my baby brother like that, I ain't forgetting who I am ever again.
This is a character who called the hit on D-Wiz. This is a character who we can't rule out in the running in terms of calling the hit on Famous. So, if Crystal is to be taken off the chessboard, who's to say she doesn't have a say in it as well? I do think the tide is beginning to turn with the Thomases. There's going to be a moment, or maybe a couple of moments, which just completely tears his family straight down the middle. And again, I don't think it's just going to be one specific event. It'll probably be a few events, a few bombshells that drop one after the other. There's the Famous death. Joyce is also on her way out pretty soon. That's another guaranteed death. If Marvin, Rock, or both were involved in Famous's death, that's another. Then there's also potentially Crystal. Again, her past behavior in terms of eliminating threats to protect her relationship with Kanan, combined with Crystal's influence, is definitely enough to raise this as a topic of discussion. Now I do want to discuss an alternative perspective because I've said it before, Crystal is a very intelligent young girl. We need to see her reaction to Famous's death first, even though I don't think they've interacted or even spoken to each other. I'm sure she'll know how close he was with Kanan. I'm sure in 406, Kanan will probably confide in Crystal. But I do wonder if the situation with Famous makes Crystal think about the dangers that comes with being with Kanan. And could she potentially realize, do you know what, I think I need to leave while I still can. The reason why I'm raising this as an alternative perspective is because many thought Symphony would die in season 2, but he didn't. He left New York. Again, Crystal is very intelligent. Could she look at this whole situation with Famous and think, look, I do love Kanan, but this whole world that he's in is way too messy for my liking. I can't be anywhere near this, where she then just leaves. Based on history, we have seen people like Symphony make it out of Queens, so that's also something that definitely can't be ruled out. Not everything has to end in death in power. So, definitely something to keep in mind, and another perspective to this situation with Crystal. Now, coming round to my thoughts, theories, and my personal opinion, what do I think is going to happen with Crystal? Will she be taken off the chessboard? Will Rock be involved? Could she leave New York and realize being involved with Kanan and around in this world is way too dangerous? Which one? At this moment in time, I'm probably leaning towards her being taken out, only because we've spoken so much about how this is the season where Kanan feels that pain, where he feels a lot more death, and the only way to make him turn into this cold character that we saw from Power is by taking away loved ones. kill everything inside of Kanan, make him dead inside just like jukeboxes. Famous is one, and I do think Crystal can definitely be another. And what could be the final straw is him finding out the Thomases had something to do with it, either Rock on her own, or maybe with Marvin. That would completely shift the dynamics of the Thomases once again, and make things even worse for Rock, at a time where she's dealing with her crumbling empire. Her empire's on the verge of collapse because of Unique. Marvin's making moves behind her back, lying to her, and that's another fallout she's gonna have to deal with when it eventually goes wrong with Stefano and the Italians, because it definitely will. Having this issue with Kanan on top, I think is the last thing that Rock needs, but it gives her one more issue to deal with. A big issue, because we all know how much she loves Kanan. We know how much the show is centered around the relationship of Kanan and Rock. And on the relationship, Sasha Penn also had to say this also back in March. Everything that happens to him in some way reflects back on his relationship with his mother, which is obviously the most important and formative relationship in his life. The death of Detective Howard is sort of another brick in the wall of this relationship with his mother. Kanan's story is a character study of him in Season 4 and his relationship with his mother. So, he's basically saying how Season 4 will dive deep into the complex relationship between mother and son, the dynamic, and how it will basically shape Kanan's darker evolution. And I do think the way they add even more depth to it is by having Rock involved in maybe calling the hit on Famous, maybe having something to do with Crystal's death, one or the other, or even both. So, that's my thoughts. I do think Crystal will probably be the next death Kanan will have to deal with after maybe his grandma Joyce Thomas, in my opinion. It may even end up being another mystery and question which is very similar to the Famous situation. Come towards the end of Season 4, we might actually be asking, who killed Crystal? What happened to Crystal? It might end up being a theme where Kanan has to search for answers again. So, that's my thoughts, but that's a breakdown of where we are in terms of who I think could potentially be the next big death after Famous, at least for Kanan. So the floor is now yours. Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, because there's a lot of different perspectives I've been through in this particular breakdown. Can you see Crystal being a big death that could potentially hurt Kanan in the second half of Season 4 after Joyce Thomas? Definitely let me know your thoughts. But as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.